Imagine if every step became a challenge. If standing up from a chair felt like climbing a mountain, or if your body moved in ways you didn't intend. For millions of people, this is life with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is a progressive movement disorder that affects not just the body, but every aspect of daily living. Yet today, new breakthroughs in research, treatments, and therapies are offering hope like never before. On Healthy Connections, we explore the realities of Parkinson's, its impact, its challenges, and the powerful ways medicine and community are helping people live stronger, fuller lives. Hello and welcome to Healthy Connections. I'm Annetta Wilson, your host. Healthy Connections is a show dedicated to exploring a wide variety of topics, from prenatal care to Alzheimer's disease. And we do so with a wide variety of perspectives, from the professionals that help treat the syndromes to everyday people like you and me who may have personal experience dealing with these topics on a first-hand basis. Stay tuned for Healthy Connections. Joining us today on Healthy Connections is one of the world's leading experts in the field. He's not only a renowned neurologist and researcher, but also the author of the new New York Times bestselling book, The Parkinson's Plan, a guide designed to empower patients and families with the latest information and strategies for living well with Parkinson's. Dr. Michael Okun, welcome. It's an honor to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Annetta.
So let's just take it from the top. I don't want to assume that the audience knows anything. What is Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, so Parkinson's, we think of it as a brain, syndrome, right? And so what happens in very simple terms is that there are cells in your brain and there are circuits in your brain, and when they malfunction, you can get symptoms like shuffling in your feet, like tremor or stiffness or slowness. And when you see those symptoms, we start to put that together and we think of, could this be Parkinson's disease? Now, one of the things that is really interesting is that people have always thought Parkinson's is a brain disease only, but it's actually a full body disease, and we see some of the abnormalities that are called proteins, these abnormal proteins in your skin, and we see them in your gut and in other areas. So now we're thinking of Parkinson's as a full body disease.
It's a holistic.
It's a whole disease, and not only that, when we made comments about Parkinson's at the White House, we talked about it being, the most complex disease in medicine, because it not only has things like stiffness and slowness and tremors, so those are the motor symptoms, but it also has depression, anxiety, problems thinking, problems with sleep, and we call those the non-motor symptoms.
How does that where do you start as a neurologist? Because there's so many moving parts here.
Yeah, so one of the most important things to do if you suspect Parkinson's is to try to see somebody with expertise. So I'm a neurologist, and so that would be a brain doctor. That would be a great place to start if your community has somebody that is trained there. There are specialty neurologists who are trained called movement disorders neurologists, but there's a real shortage of those, and we talk a little bit about that in the book, about how we need, as we're growing, and these numbers of Parkinson cases are growing, how we're going to need more specialists to take care of this disease.
You said the number of cases are growing. What are the contributing factors? What is causing this growth?
Yeah, so back in 2012, I wrote a book called 10 Secrets to a Happier Life with Parkinson's, and actually was interviewed here on Orange TV. And we talked about that book, which also was a runaway bestseller. And one of the things that was very interesting is in the prologue, in the very beginning of the book, I used two words: Parkinson pandemic. And it made everybody sort of alarmed, like, oh my gosh, why are you saying it's a pandemic? Is it really growing that fast?
Because we think, you hear pandemic, you think contagious.
Right, and so people started to think, well, what's going on here? We wrote another book called Ending Parkinson's Disease in 2020. And by that time, we had information from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation showing Parkinson had become the fastest growing neurodegenerative disease.
To what do you attribute that?
Well, it turns out it's growing faster than Alzheimer's, which is very shocking. And when we look at things, we always first look at something called heritability. That's your genes, that's the genetics, right? Could it be something that you're just born with in your genetics? And it turns out Parkinson's isn't that heritable, meaning that the genetic causes are only 13 out of every 100 cases.
So if that's the case, where is it coming from and what is contributing to it?
So one of the things we talk about in the plan, and the P stands for prevent, is the environmental factors. And these are things that we really didn't pay a lot of attention to, and maybe we blew off and we shouldn't have when people were pointing out, hey, this person in my neighborhood has Parkinson, there's 3 other people in this cluster, what's going on? And so we think about, in very simple terms, water, air, food. Okay. And
chemicals.
That's right. So we're thinking about chemicals. When we think about, chemicals and pesticides that are in our environment, okay? We think about the chemicals that are in our water. Think about the air that we breathe, and remember that the nose is like the gateway to the brain, okay? And you can get Parkinson through the nose. That's one thing. We call that, through the nose is nasal. And then if we go through the gut, so we see Parkinson in the gut. And so we saw it gut first or brain first.
You said you can get Parkinson's. That implies you catch it?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that now we believe that the environmental factors are really important. So your exposures are so important. And so when we talk about all the things that you can do to prevent exposure, so bad air, bad water, bad food, okay, so we think about pesticides, chemicals, air, cleaning up our environment. And when we think back, even in the Industrial Revolution, when the first couple of cases of Parkinson, when they started to describe them in the early 1800s, there was a guy named James Parkinson, go figure, right? Saw 5 people walking down the street that had Parkinson. It wasn't that common. But what was going on at that time, Annetta? It was the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And with the Industrial Revolution, we grew. Both our populations grew, but also, not for, things, to be bad for folks in terms of factory conditions and those types of factors, but factories grew up, we had bad water, we ended up, polluting our air, and then we ended up putting pesticides on our food supply, not because we wanted to hurt people, but because we wanted to make more food available for folks.
So this sounds really like the downside of progress and the conveniences that we enjoy today, but has that train left the station never to return again? I mean, can we get our arms around this?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We have a Parkinson 25 we talk about in the book, 25 things you can do whether you have Parkinson or not. And if you got lung cancer, which I hope you don't get lung cancer, the first thing that your doctor would tell you would be, quit smoking, right?
Sure.
And so if you get Parkinson in these diseases, we need to also quit poisoning ourselves. So that's one of the Parkinson 25. So not exposing ourselves continuously to these chemicals and pesticides. We think about air purifiers in our house, right, for the air. You think about washing your fruit, a good vinegar wash or a good wash, or eating organic, right, is super important.
Things you can do at a micro level.
At a, not even at a micro level, at a daily level, and just thinking about how can we change the way that we live, both to make sure that we're going to reduce the number of cases and we're going to reduce the burden on this generation as well as the next generation.
Are most people surprised when they hear you talk about the only word I can think of is that it's contagious, you can get it? Or are most people thinking it is something that your body is just programmed for?
Well, we don't think of it as a contagious infectious disease, okay? We don't think of it in that way. But we do think of it as your body and the cells in your body have a certain zen. And when we write about it in the book, we interviewed lots of people and have lots of stories of folks who have come down with Parkinson's, even very young people with Parkinson. And we think about, just like your house has a thermostat, everything has to be kept at a certain temperature and has to be regulated. And when you throw off that regulation with a pesticide or with a chemical, then there's dysfunction. And there was a very famous physician called Hippocrates, and Hippocrates talked about disease, and disease being a product of a lot of our daily sins. Okay, so what are those daily sins? And we think about the things in our environment that must be affecting, the amount of Parkinson that we're seeing, and is a major factor in this disease.
We're going to come back and pick up with that and what we can do about it in just a second. Don't go away. There's so much more to come. We'll be right back with Dr. Okun. We are continuing our discussion with Dr. Michael Okun on Parkinson's disease. Now we're going to talk about prevention, diagnosis, and care. What's one of the biggest myths when it comes to this disease?
Annetta, one of the myths that people, I hope, will appreciate that are watching is that Parkinson's disease is not treatable. And in fact,
That's a myth.
It's a myth. A lot of people get diagnosed with Parkinson and they think it isn't treatable. They think that it's a death sentence, and it should be considered more like a life sentence. And so there's an advocacy group that was born after we wrote our last book called Ending Parkinson's Disease, called the PD Avengers, and it's led by this guy Larry Gifford from Vancouver, Canada. And Larry says it should be a life sentence. And when we give the diagnosis of Parkinson's—
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is you give the diagnosis of Parkinson, you say, you have Parkinson's disease, okay? We need to be careful to explain to people that that means they don't have something like ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, they don't have something like Alzheimer's, and there are so many treatments, and it's such a livable disease. And in fact, I saw someone yesterday in the clinic that said, and we hear this over and over, I feel better since the diagnosis, I've gotten healthier, and there is a path forward to living happier with Parkinson.
One of the most famous cases, of course, is Michael J. Fox. And we've seen over the years his symptoms seem to have gotten worse. Is there a way to arrest progression at a certain point?
Yeah, so at this time, we don't have a way to stop disease progression. We are researching, and part of the N in the Parkinson plan is navigation of new therapies, and that's our ability to be able to measure disease, why it starts, where it starts, how it progresses, and we call these things biomarkers. And as we begin to be able to measure this, we want to develop therapies for people like Michael J. Fox to try to stop disease progression, okay? And to get to the next level, which would be to roll back and prevent Parkinson for this generation and the next generation. And we call that primary prevention. So we don't want our kids and the next generations to get Parkinson. But then for the folks that do have it, your point is so important. We need to develop these biomarkers so that we can develop therapies for folks to be able to slow the disease and stop its progression.
So much of what you're talking about seems to be environmental. You talked about chemicals and the things we inhale and things even through our skin. Is there a point at which we're not going to be able to corral this?
Well, so, I am very excited, okay, about where we're going, because we haven't had this conversation before, Annetta. So it's time for us to have the primary prevention conversation and to remove these unnecessary chemicals and toxins from our environment, all right? They're unnecessary. We don't need them.
But that sounds like such a Herculean task. It sounds so big.
So prevention isn't going to be, defined by a pill. It's going to be defined by policy. Okay. And the policy starts with us talking with each other, not at each other, and we need to begin to have that dialogue. And I'll just give you a good example for folks that are watching. So we were part of getting the Ending Parkinson's Disease Act passed. It's very similar to the book that we published in NAME, and that act passed 407 positives, like 407 to 6 or 407 to 9. It was incredibly positive in the House of Representatives and unanimously in the Senate. And if you tell me the last time you saw something like that, bipartisan. And so we all are affected by diseases, and Parkinson's is a community disease, okay? And so that means that we all know people in our families, people that are in our communities, and we're seeing these clusters of cases. And so I'm actually quite optimistic that we can make the changes necessary to reduce the burden.
You just said clusters of cases. Do you see them in specific regions, among specific groups?
Yeah, so within the book, we actually interview dozens of people. We go out all over America, we talk to folks, and we actually dig into these areas where you're seeing, multiple cases of Parkinson's.
Where are they? And what do they have in common?
So they tend to be next to what are called Superfund sites. These are sites that have been polluted. The United States government has said, yes, these, some chemical or some toxic spill has happened. We need to clean it up. Now we monitor it, but have we cleaned them all up? No, we haven't. Mm-hmm. And they tend to be close to military bases.
The whole Camp Lejeune.
The whole Camp Lejeune, which has a 70% higher risk of Parkinson if you were at Camp Lejeune, okay? So the water there. And we think about being next to dry cleaners. And in Europe, we don't put grocery stores in Europe, they don't allow them next to dry cleaners, because the dry cleaners, if you dispose the chemicals in what's called a dry well, you dig a hole, you pour the chemicals in to get rid of it, they get into the soil, they get into the to the local neighborhoods, and they can end up increasing diseases like both cancer and Parkinson's. And we chronicle a number of these cases that have been shown mainly in Rochester, New York, is where some of the stories that we told, but there are stories all over the United States.
Let's talk about what we can do at home to kind of prevent or manage or care if there is diagnosed Parkinson's, or we want to make sure it doesn't reach our door. What can we do at home?
Right. So first of all, if you're diagnosed with Parkinson and you're listening and you're watching, there are so many things you can do to live a great life. And in the Parkinson 25, we talk about how important exercise is. Okay. Exercise is like a drug for this. So we try to get your steps up to 7,000 or 7,000 step equivalents. Sleep is really important, 6 to 8 hours of sleep. An air purifier, particularly if you're living in an urban area, we got to clean that air up, okay? Mm-hmm. A carbon water filter is really important, okay, to have, especially if you have well water, okay, to make sure that you're not getting contaminated with things like trichloroethylene, okay? And then washing your fruits and vegetables and trying to buy organic, although a lot of people can't afford organic
So
produce.
If you can't, you mentioned earlier a vinegar and water wash for your fruits.
Yeah, vinegar, water washes, lots of places have these, lots of supermarkets and convenience stores, or copious water can be another way to wash your fruits, but making sure you get the pesticides off, because remember, side means killer in Latin, okay? And so these were developed to help our food supply, to help farmers, to help more people to get fed, but then we put them on there to kill off the animals, but we don't wash them off before we eat. And so trying to get rid of those insects and insecticides, fungicides, and other things that are contained in those, it's so important. The other thing is, in your house, you have to look out for not poisoning yourself, another one of the Parkinson 25. So there may be products that you see, things like rotenone. We tell the story of Tim Greenemeyer, who studied rotenone, which causes Parkinson's disease, and then he got Parkinson himself, possibly from that exposure. Tragic. One of my mentors at Emory University when I was there. And so really important that we're looking at things even within our own house, within our own garages.
Reading labels to see what's in the product.
Labels are really important, and information is important. And Annetta, the dialogue is so important. It's just important that we begin to talk about these things. And if we're going to catch up to cardiology, we talk about primary prevention of heart disease and everything. Mm-hmm. It's time that we start talking about primary prevention of diseases like Parkinson's.
Well, Dr. Oken, you are certainly on the front lines, and this hopefully has gone a long way toward getting this conversation going in all of our homes. The book is called The Parkinson's Plan. It's already a New York Times bestseller. Thank you for sharing this information and giving us a few aha moments that we didn't know about.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to be here, Annetta. Thank you.
More right after this. Don't go away. We are now joined by Anissa Mitchell with the Parkinson and Movement Disorder Alliance to share what that organization is doing for families. We've learned so much today about Parkinson's. What happens after the diagnosis and how do you step in?
Well, I think it depends on the person. Some people tend to just move on with their lives and not really worry about it, because usually the first few years is what we call the honeymoon stage. It doesn't really disrupt their life that much, but it can be really challenging for people, and so we like to step in and offer resources from the very beginning, from the moment that they've been diagnosed until the rest of the journey of their life, to support them. So we want to make sure that they know their disease, that they have the resources, whether it's finding the right physician, a movement disorder specialist, knowing what kind of behaviors that they can engage in terms of lifestyle choices to help them not only feel better, but maybe potentially slow down things with their disease, understanding what their treatment options are so that they can be assured that they're given every opportunity to have the highest quality of life, what the other options are for them in terms of management, as well as addressing their social and psychological needs. So we want them to be equipped so that they can advocate for themselves.
You answer a lot of the question marks that come after a diagnosis or for people who have other disorders, not just Parkinson. One of the things you said was you help them find a movement disorder specialist. What is that?
So a movement disorder specialist is a neurologist who has gone on for additional fellowship training, either 1 to 2 years at a movement disorder center under the guidance of a seasoned movement disorder specialist. So they are focused primarily on the diseases that fall under movement disorders. Parkinson is probably the largest movement disorder, followed by, well, actually led by essential tremor. Essential tremor is a movement disorder also. And then there's other movement disorders such as progressive supranuclear palsy, PSP, multi-system atrophy, MSA.
So anything that affects motor skills.
Exactly.
So you said connecting people with resources. If someone has gotten a diagnosis or feel that there may be an issue they want to get in front of, when they call you, what's one of the first things you do?
Well, honestly, we're wanting to find out what their needs actually are. So we do have an 800 number and people do call in. We also have a very engaging website that people can go to. There's all kinds of resources on that website. We look at people in terms of sort of an ecosystem. Not only do we serve the person that's diagnosed, we serve their care partner, we serve their family members, the adult children, we serve those who might be supporting them in the community. That's either a support group leader, it could be a therapist. Certainly there are experts such as their movement disorder specialists, maybe some advanced practice providers like nurses and physician assistants. We serve all of them. So
that is a big mission.
Yes, it is a big mission.
So what is your personal why?
My personal why? Well, I started in the work of Parkinson's over 15 years ago, initially running a local Parkinson outreach program. While I was there, and I've always worked in the medical field, I certainly working every single day got to know a little bit about Parkinson's. I recognize the fact that not everybody shows up with the same symptoms. Everybody thinks of tremors when they think of Parkinson's, but there's a lot of people that never develop a tremor. There's a lot, it's a very complex disease. There's a lot of other symptoms, and those things are not necessarily as known. But I was given that information that eventually I started noticing symptoms in my own mother. And it took a while to convince her that she needed to go see a specialist, and eventually she was diagnosed with Parkinson's. But I wouldn't have known that had I not been educated to the degree that I was. And it's my mission to help people have the education they need to recognize that while we call it a movement disorder, it actually is way more complex than that. There are so many other symptoms that we call non-motor symptoms that have more impact on a person's life than having a tremor. So we want people to be well educated about their disease and support them in all of those other symptoms. And so we are the connectors. That's what PMD Alliance is. We don't serve in all of those ways. What we do is connect them to those resources and empower those who are providing those services. That's where our ecosystem comes into play. We support the supporters.
That's a beautiful way of putting that. You support the supporters, because we've all heard the stories that the attention is given to the person who has the syndrome or the disorder, and the caregiver is usually left to fend for themselves. So you step in and bridge that gap with what you do. So thank you for taking your personal story and turning it into a mission that's helping to support so many other people.
It's my pleasure. Being a daughter to a mother who had it, I recognize that there is a lot involved in caring for someone and loving someone, but those spousal care partners, those who might be living with them, it's a drain a lot of times, just because they're trying to do all things for their loved one, be all things, while also doing the other things in their life that they have to be responsible for. So we feel very strongly about supporting the care partners. It's a huge passion for us.
Well, thank you, Anissa. The Parkinson and Movement Disorder Alliance is there to support you as well. We'll be right back. One of the things we learned today in this discussion about Parkinson's disease, it is not simple. There are lots of layers and there is a lot to learn. Hopefully, after watching this show today, you have learned a lot more to help you continue to make healthy connections. I'm Annetta Wilson. Thanks for joining us.